Greetings and welcome to Coptic Solidarity's second annual Modern Coptic Martyrs Remembrance Day. We're here in the U.S. Capitol. This is our second event. And for all of you who are joining us on Facebook, we welcome you here as well today. On behalf of Coptic Solidarity, I want to extend our gratitude to all of our speakers and also to all of you who made time in your busy schedules to join us. Coptic Solidarity launched this new initiative because we noticed that there's been a huge increase in the number of Coptic martyrs. The Coptic Church has a very strong and long history of martyrdom, but often people associate martyrdom with the early faith of the church, and so we felt like it was important to start showing what's been happening. So we wanted to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice. We also wanted to find a way to bring greater awareness to the discrimination and the persecution that's happening. So we hope that this event will serve that dual purpose. I'm just going to make some kind of remarks to set the stage, give a little background about Coptic Solidarity's views before we get going. And then as our members of Congress come in, we're going to put them up here, have them speak, and then, of course, go back and forth with our panelists. So we appreciate your flexibility and understanding that. So Coptic Solidarity's mission is to lead active efforts to achieve equal citizenship for Copts. The number of Copts who have been martyred in the past few years is staggering. We had our annual conference in June, and Mr. Bahayoddin Hassan spoke actually at that time, and he is the co-founder of the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. During that time, in his speech, he said that over the past few years, there has been at least 500 attacks and acts of discrimination against Copts in Egypt. Around 150 of those attacks were on houses of worship, and 75 attacks were on Copts' property. The attacks involved around 90 cases of kidnapping and resulted in the deaths of 170 Copts. Of those 500 incidents of attacks and discrimination, around 300 occurred after President Sisi was elected president. Of the 170 deaths, over 100 took place on President Sisi's watch, not to mention the 28 Copts who were killed by the military at the Maspero massacre on October 9, 2011. So the reason, ending with that, the Maspero massacre, the reason that we chose this date to commemorate Copts is that it's nearly the 6th anniversary of the Coptic, the Maspero massacre. The anniversary is October 9th. Now, some of you may not be familiar with what happened on that day, so I'm going to share a little bit about it. And also, as you can see, we have some really tragic pictures, very graphic ones, of people who were killed on that day. So, to set the stage, what happened at that time, in 2011, an Orthodox church near Aswan, Upper Egypt, was demolished by local Islamic Salafists. These Islamists demanded that the Coptic church remove any visible Christian symbols, including crosses, bells, and steeples from the church structures. Tension soared when Copts in the area refused to abide by these demands. To avoid escalation of the conflict, the governor of Aswan organized a meeting between the Salafists and Coptic leaders to reach an agreement. When the mediation efforts failed, the Salafists threatened with violence. Eventually, those Salafists destroyed the church. In order to protest the destruction of their church, Copts, many thousands of them, as well as some others, joined, and they decided to meet in the Shura, which is a Christian neighborhood in Egypt, and march to the Maspero building, which is a state-run television station. As the demonstrators approached their destination, they were attacked by Islamist fanatic mobs that laid in wait. They were hurling stones at them from the tops of traffic bridges. The Egyptian army forces intercepted the demonstrators who found themselves caught between them and the Islamist mobs. The Egyptian army then used riot gear, they used live ammunition, batons, and they actually used armed personnel carriers to run in zigzag patterns and run over as many people as possible. During that time, there were two independent stations who were broadcasting live the event that was taking place. The Egyptian military demanded that those broadcasts stop. They also said that good Egyptians should go out and help protect the military because they're being attacked by Copts, which was blatantly false. So end of the result basically is that 28 demonstrators were killed. 27 of the 28 were cops. 14 of them were people who were run over by those armed personnel carriers. I know it's very graphic, but that's one of the reasons why we have pictures today to show what that was like. High-ranking officers in the military, police, and other army branches oversaw the military during the Massacre. To date, only 2 low-ranking soldiers have been found guilty of a misdemeanor of involuntary killing. Both remain free and continue to serve in their army unit. One Coptic demonstrator was convicted of aggression against army personnel. And of course, the massacre is still not officially recognized as such by the government, and the investigations have been inconclusive. So that's kind of the backdrop for this event to commemorate modern martyrs. But what we've seen since that time, on October 9, 2011, is a continuation of the attacks. We know many of them. I'm sure you're familiar with them. There's the more public ones, and then there's the ones that really don't hit the media, but are just as heinous. We saw the despicable beheading of 20 cops in the one Iranian on the beach in Libya by ISIS. We saw brutal murders in Arish, where a couple was murdered in their beds, an elderly couple, many others. Now about 355 families have had to escape Arish, Sinai, and it's virtually emptied of cops. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the bombings of St. Peter and Paul Church in Cairo that resulted in the murder of over 28 cops. Then there was the twin Palm Sunday bombings that hit the cathedrals in Alexandria and in Tanta. And one most tragic recent one was the murder of the pilgrims traveling to St. Samuel's Monastery that involved small children. So in response to all of this, Coptic Solidarity has done a few things. One is we have started a registry. So this is basically a place online where we track all these different incidents, and we're building it out. It takes time. It's not super accessible right now. It's just like a Word document. We hope to build it into a more user-friendly database in the near future. But I do want to mention that a copy of the current registry is in the folders in the back. So if you want to see, and then of course there's sources listed in there. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on the context. This is really important. So there's another document we included in that folder that's basically explaining where Coptic Solidarity believes things stand right now. There's a belief by some that it's a kind of new phenomenon with the rise of ISIS, but Coptic Solidarity believes that there's a more historical explanation for the events that we're seeing right now. The document that I mentioned is called Cops in Egypt Situation and Policy Recommendations. It also includes our most comprehensive list of policy recommendations that we've made. So I hope you'll take a chance to look at it. But just kind of real briefly about the historical context, we would say that it started over 4 decades ago, and that it started under President Sadat, when he allied and unleashed the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups. He then initiated the Islamic transformation of Egypt. And in his constitution, he said that Sharia is the main source of legislation. So that thereby Sharia becomes basically is the principal source of reference for the entire constitution. Other articles were to be interpreted according to Sharia. The other thing he did was he opened the door to Salafis from Saudi Arabia, and it planted its roots in the society at that time. So state-sponsored media started broadcasting hate speech by Muslim sheikhs, attacking and denigrating Christians, declaring that they had the true faith. So the decades-long efforts to modernize Egypt, to emancipate women and cops came to a sudden halt and actually began going back in time. The prevalence of these extremist teachings have caused a decline in education as a whole, and culture, and basically it's resulted in this new culture of hate and bigotry. So this has been happening for several decades. So that's why Coptic Solidarity sees the events, the culture of impunity, all these things that are happening. And it can't just happen automatically just because a few terrorist groups spring up. It's rooted in a culture of hate that has been implemented into the system of education and the media and every aspect of society. So while President Sisi continuously blames homegrown terrorists, attacking on cops, he blames them on foreign terrorists or the Muslim Brotherhood to exonerate his government from responsibility. It's important to remember that some of these attackers we know, in the case of the St. Samuel Monastery, They said, the attackers actually spoke a local Egyptian dialect, but immediately the bombing happened against the groups in Libya. So those are things that we need to be paying attention to. I would say that at the end, Coptic Solidarity believes that there's three options for Copts at this time. One is to convert to Islam, the other is to live as barely tolerated Dominican citizens, or the other is to immigrate. We've seen that a lot of people have immigrated. In fact, we can't even really keep track of how many, so many have left to do that this time. So I hope that in conclusion, you'll take the chance to look at the policy recommendations we made, and we welcome your input, your ideas, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation. So at this point, I want to introduce our guest. We have Congressman French Hill with us. Congressman French Hill is somebody that Coptic Solidarity more recently started working with. We've been so impressed and happy to be served. He is a ninth generation Arkansan, if I can say it. He's a 22nd member of Congress to represent Central Arkansas. He was elected in 2014 and began his first congressional term in 2015. He serves on the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services, where he was appointed to the committee's leadership team as Majority Whip. But most importantly, we're grateful that you're here standing with Coptic Christians on this modern Coptic Martyrs Remembrance Day.
Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to have you in the U.S. Capitol. Proud to have you here today. And nice to see you, Your Excellency. It's nice to be with you and talk about this very important issue on this important day. But this, I want to put it in a larger context, is that the American people have great sensitivity and support and interest in the plight of religious minorities in the Middle East generally. On the Nineveh Plain in Syria, and certainly what we're going to talk about today in Egypt. And personally, I pray for them every day, and I pray for the Sunni and Shia people of Syria and northern Iraq and in other countries in the Middle East who just want to live their life and tend to their family, their friends, and their occupation too. And I think we ought to all keep that in mind across the region. But as we gather in tribute to those Copts who've given their lives for their religious beliefs, I think it's fitting for me to reflect on my opportunity to meet the Coptic Pope earlier this year when I was in Cairo. And one thing he said that demonstrated his passion, his faith, his great leadership for the Copts in Egypt. He said, "We will pray in the churches, and if they destroy the churches, we will pray in the mosques, and if they destroy the mosques, we'll pray in the streets." And he made a very compelling case in our congressional group that met with him, and we walked away very touched and moved by that. In preparing for that trip, I had been repeatedly heard and discussed and read about the plight of Coptic Christians of Egypt. And today I'm honored to be here and remember those martyred, including the bombings in St. Peter and St. Paul and Cairo last December. Murdered by a coward as women and children prayed, and I got to visit St. Peter and St. Paul in February and to see the blood on the walls there that marked the horror and the chaos of that place of prayer, of peace and serenity. And it was good. I had to have the opportunity to walk the halls and kneel in prayer in the cathedral and reflect on the Gospel of Matthew and Mary fleeing to Egypt with baby Jesus to set them for the King Mary. It was a very touching day for me and illustrated the trauma and problems and challenges of Coptic life in Egypt. We remember those Copts killed on Palm Sunday in Tangier and Alexandria. And we remember those Copts killed 1 month later on their pilgrimage to St. Santos. The terrorist attacks have been numerous, killing scores each time. And although Coptic Christians have been victims of numerous attacks of terrorist groups like ISIS, it's been most disturbing to me to learn about the many of attacks against Copts and Christian churches that are carried out by fellow Egyptians. The U.S.-Egypt partnership and Egypt's role as a partner in our fight against terrorism around the world and violent extremism is an essential part of U.S. foreign policy. And Egypt's stability is vital to that region as a partner in the United States and all of our allies in the region. But while I appreciate President El-Sisi's symbolic gestures towards the Copts and Protestants in Egypt, such as attending Mass with the Coptic Pope, and the 2016 law aimed at making the restoration or rebuilding of churches easier, it's simply not enough. Attacks in rural communities against Copts continue to occur, and yet the victims rarely, if ever, any receive a form of justice. I believe it's time for the government of Egypt to reform primary school education and improve the image of Christians in Egyptian culture and in the media. I believe it's time for the government of Egypt to promote the positive role that non-governmental organizations can play in civil society to make Egypt a better country. And when I was in Cairo, I referenced to bring balance to the discussion about non-governmental organizations, Rotary International. I've been a proud Rotarian. I'm a third-generation Rotarian in the United States with a father and grandfather who participated. And I reminded President El-Sisi that Egypt was one of the first countries, it was the first country in the Middle East to adopt Rotary and bring it into civil society in Egypt back in the 1920s. And there's no better objective of a non-governmental organization and doing good around the world than Rotary. And so let's bring balance back to the discussion of non-governmental organizations. And I believe it's time for the government of Egypt to end the culture of impunity for attacks on Christians and instead undertake the arrest, prosecution, and conviction of individuals who carry out these wicked acts against their fellow countrymen. While the Egyptian government is not responsible for the actions of individuals, it is responsible for ensuring perpetrators of violent acts that result in the loss of life or property are held accountable for their actions. And that's why I'm in the process of working with my colleagues of refining a draft House resolution that calls on the Egyptian government to do just that. The International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 states that it shall be the policy of the United States to condemn violations of religious freedom and to promote and to assist other governments in the promotion of the fundamental right to the freedom of religion. I know the U.S. House and the U.S. government stand here today ready to assist Egypt in that crucially important area. This is a great opportunity for Egypt to emphasize the importance that Copts can play in Egyptian society as Egyptians. Fundamental American values, among which are commitments to religious freedom and human rights, are critical components of U.S. domestic and foreign policy. And I will continue to support and advocate for freedom and liberty throughout the world. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you today, to pay tribute to those Copts who have given their lives, and I thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Hill. We have a few other members who will be stopping by, but I'm not entirely sure when each will come. So I think right now we'll move on to some of our panelists, and we need to take a break at some point and have the members come up as well. The next speaker I would like to invite up is Mr. Mansour Al-Hajj. He's the director of Memories Reform Project. He was born and raised in Saudi Arabia and emigrated to the U.S. in 2005. He has a degree in Sharia and Islamic Studies from the International University of Africa in Khartoum, Sudan. Before joining Memory, he was a senior reporter for AAFAQ, an Arabic news website that focuses on reform and human rights in the Middle East. Mr. Al-Hajj has participated in multiple briefings on Capitol Hill, including on the topic of movement of extremism in the Muslim world, struggle between states and citizens. So I hope you will join me in welcoming Mr. Al-Hajj.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm so happy to be here. And thank you for coming to this important event. As you all know, my name is Mansour Al-Hajj. I was born and grew up in Saudi Arabia. And I have lived also in Sudan, Chad, briefly in Egypt before coming to the United States. In my job at Memory as a director of reform, we mainly focus on the education side and also on promoting voices who are advocating for tolerance, peace, and understanding. Because our understanding is that all these crimes and atrocities that have been committed against minorities, being Shia or Sunni or Yazidis or Christians in the Middle East and Africa, can be traced down to the ideology of hate that we all personally grew up believing in it somehow. I went through the Saudi education system, and at my early childhood time, I was indoctrinated and somehow become Wahhabi radical. And that had a huge impact on my life because the very first Christian person I have met, I was 13 or 14 back then in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And the very first thing I thought about was trying to convert them to Islam. Even with my limited English ability then, I was trying to really talk him to convert him to Islam. And throughout my life, after, say, moving to Chad at an early age to go to high school there, I have also witnessed discrimination against Christians who are fellow citizens in Chad. And, for example, it is considered an insult to call a Muslim a Christian in Chad, in the Chadian culture. Even when calling a Christian is also a degrading form of description. I've also witnessed similar discrimination against Christian in Sudan, where I went to college. And we all know the war that had been still going on against Christians, which led to the secession of South Sudan. So, with all these experiences that I have gained throughout my life, now I'm dedicating most of my time to actually promote people who advocate for tolerance, for understanding, for coexistence in the Middle East and Africa. I look for voices who call for peace, who actually encourage people to come together. And to me personally, I believe that the main problem that minority groups are facing, Muslim world, that I can relate them to either Islamism or dictatorship. They both, in my understanding, thrive on discrimination, on intolerance, on fragmented communities. And sadly, somehow are being supported by Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. So it's not even Muslim-Christian thing. Now we have Muslim between Sunnis and Shia, also fueled by these countries. In Chad now, for example, we have a Sunni-Sunni struggle going on between the Sufis and the Wahhabis. Prior to petrodollars, we didn't have Wahhabis in Chad. Right now, these two groups of people sometimes fight because the Wahhabis, for example, claim that the Sufis are actually adherent of the true Islam. So I would like to keep my presentation brief because Muslim has a very important time and maybe things to do back then. And I welcome everybody's questions afterward. So as for recommendation, I mostly encourage the United States government to actually empower civil society groups in Muslim countries in the Middle East. Because civil society groups who share the same values that we have here in the States of coexistence, tolerance, and freedom of speech and expressions, are the ones who can really help future generation to be less hateful. And that would also come with minimizing similar atrocities to take place. Another recommendation is actually exposing organizations and countries that sponsor and promote intolerance in our countries. I think they should really be held accountable and be sanctioned, or at least being banned from exercising or promoting intolerance. My last recommendation would be encouraging government to respect freedom of expression in communities, because I believe when we have freedom of expression in countries, we can at least deal with our differences in a civil manner, rather than if freedom of expression is being oppressed and people don't have the right to express themselves, they would resort to violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate hearing from, especially with your background, the recommendations that you have. It brings a lot of credibility, I believe, to this event. Up next, we have Congressman Brad Sherman from California, actually from Sherman Oaks. He represents California's San Fernando Valley. He has long been one of our strongest supporters for COPS, and he knows the issues very well. He's very committed. Thank you so much, Congressman, for being here today.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It is a pleasure to be with you, and especially to hear Mansour's speech, because I actually hear a lot about human rights in Sudan every dinner I eat, because my wife is the chief human rights officer for the State Department for the country of Sudan and South Sudan and Uganda. Some of the people that she worked with, and I think it's very important that the government of Saudi Arabia continue to provide safe haven for those who have already been admitted to their country and who are unpopular in Khartoum. It is good to be with you on the second annual Modern Coptic Martyrs Remembrance Day. I have served for over 20 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm one of the most senior members, and have dedicated that time to working for human rights and religious freedom. And I don't just represent the San Fernando Valley, I represent St. Mary's and St. Athanasius Church in Northridge, California. Some of the parishioners from there will be watching. This is a community that goes back, I'm told, 1,734 years. I congratulate you on that achievement. And at the same time, we have to make sure that while we remember the martyrs of the past, we need to stop a process that creates martyrs in the future. In August 2013, Islamists led mobs burned and destroyed Christian religious properties and properties that just happened to be owned by Christians following the removal of the government by the Muslim Brotherhood. 2 years later, I was the chief Democratic sponsor of H.R. 5974. Thank you for suggesting that to me. That's the Coptic Church Accountability Act. Thereafter, the Egyptian Parliament passed a law, at least removing the requirement that the president of the country approve the building of new churches and making it instead the responsibility of governors. Frankly, it should be the responsibility of local officials. We should ask the one question we asked in the San Fernando Valley when a new church is going to be built, and that is, how many parking spaces does it have? That should be the only question. I'm told that the churches destroyed in the past have been rebuilt. We need to make sure that Christians and Christian churches are protected in the future. Churches may have been rebuilt, the violence against Egypt's Coptic community continues. Violence against Copts has been a problem for centuries. Violence against Copts increased in recent years, especially with the so-called Arab Spring. The Brotherhood and now ISIS affiliates are clearly a problem. And with ISIS facing defeat in its self-proclaimed caliphate, there is a risk that some will will go back to Egypt and pose a problem for Coptic Christians. Just the Yet organization, basically an ISIS affiliate in Sinai, has claimed more than 800 attacks across Egypt, many against Copts, and that is just since November of 2014. The group is publishing videos threatening the Coptic community. Its intentions are clear. Hundreds of Copts have needed to flee to Sinai as a result of continued violence by various terrorist groups. On Sunday, ISIS claimed responsibility for an attack which caused the death of at least 44 hundreds at churches in Tanta and Alexandria on December 11th of last year. Mass at St. Peter's, a suicide bomber killed at least 25 people attending church. Now, I had a chance as a senior member of the Foreign Affairs Committee to meet with Egyptian officials. Last December, I met with the foreign minister, the ambassador, and of course, last spring, I met with President Sisi. And in all of those meetings, I make it apparent that it is important to the American people that Christian Copts be protected and be full citizens of the Republic of Egypt. I'm working to get two Muslim Brotherhood influenced organizations onto the official State Department list of foreign terrorist organizations. Hassan and Liwa
Right.
I'm doing my best.
Hassan and the US.
And I'm a co-sponsor of the Iraq and Syrian Genocide Emergency Relief and Accountability Act, which focuses on the Christian communities of Iraq and Syria. I was the chief Democratic co-sponsor of the bill I mentioned before, the Coptic Churches Accountability Act. I co-sponsored HCON Res 75, which declared that the violence against Christians, disease, and others in Iraq and Syria constituted crimes against humanity and genocide. And of course, that bill passed the House last year. I joined with Representative Crowd, I don't know if he's able to come by and speak today, in introducing HRES 440 bill condemning religious bigotry and attacks against civilians and destruction of property in Iraq and Syria. And of course, I co-sponsored the bill to create the special envoy to promote religious freedom and the freedom of religious minorities in the Near East and South Central Asia. And of course, we now have somebody filling that post, which is so important. So I look forward to working with you to make sure that religious freedom is a hallmark of Egypt, and that Christians are safe throughout the Middle East. My name is Brad Sherman, and leaving behind my Guido Weiss, who's my foreign policy advisor. If you give him your card, I'll keep you up to date on what I'm doing on foreign policy. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman Sherman. One of our greatest supporters. Always a pleasure to have you here, sir. Our next speaker is Father Theodorus Dowd. He was born in Lebanon and got his education in the Lebanese University of Beirut. Also studied theological studies and was ordained a deacon in Lebanon by the Metropolitan Corbin. He served as a priest in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil and was elevated to archpriest in Brazil at that time. Apologies here. It is not showing up. He lives in Baltimore now, and he's a Greek Orthodox priest, and we are so very pleased to have him here.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Dear Congressmen, directors, board members of the organization of Coptic Solidarity, dear friends, thank you for coming on such an important occasion. It is my honor to stand before all of you in the legislative center of this nation. My name is Father Theodore Daoud. I am a proud Orthodox Christian priest from the Levant and a proud citizen of the United States of America. I stand before you as a fellow man and a servant of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Messiah that was crucified for humanity's salvation, for us and everyone. We gather today in solidarity with the Coptic martyrs, who are the image of all the Christian martyrs from the Levant, and the innocent martyrs of freedom and the truth. These courageous and humble souls are sacrificed year after year on the altar of freedom and the human dignity, burned by the fire of ignorance and hate. What distinguishes Coptic martyrs is their ancient roots from one of the earliest civilizations, a powerful nation ruled by pharaohs and immortalized in wondrous monuments. In their time, they could show no weakness when ruling, believing that power is what makes man perfect and divine. However, after accepting Christ, this nation's descendants understood that true strength comes from loving and dying for the ones you love. Just as St. Paul says, "My strength is made perfect in weakness," they understood that to humble themselves like their Lord, willingly sacrificing this life for their brothers and sisters, is not weakness, but true power. and transcendent divinity. In this love, the ideal power of their kings was fulfilled. This great civilization and its forefathers offered food to the hungry, shelter to the homeless, and sanctuary for the persecuted, such as our young Lord and his parents fleeing Herod's sword. These people are now the ones in need of such shelter and sanctuary, but the world does not give it. I am standing here with all of you to show solidarity with the Coptic martyrs. I wonder, who should I speak about first? The dead martyrs or the living martyrs? The dead martyrs are killed and beheaded simply for being a Christian and believing in freedom, while the living martyrs are killed daily and slowly through social and political persecution. The struggle of the Copts in Egypt is a struggle of all Christians of the Middle East. These Christians are the extended image of America's core values: freedom and love for life. They died in the greatest war against darkness and ignorance because they believed in the same freedoms we do. In this manner, we cannot separate ourselves from their struggle and pain. Our great nation spends billions of dollars in Afghanistan and other regions to plant seeds of freedom. Would it not cost far less to nurture the already flourishing trees of freedom in Egypt and in the Levant? Our country cannot ignore the reality of such injustice. We must embrace the victims of this mistreatment, the orphans, widows, families of the martyred, and all minorities, wherever they may reside. Is it fair that we enjoy the bountiful fruits of liberty while others are starving for it? We should invest in the humans, not in regimes. Human values remain, but regimes come and go. You see, those who suffer persecution for human dignity and liberty are the responsibility of every nation that proclaims such values. How many living martyrs around the world struggle for their rights to freely speak and worship? How many of them are persecuted by the enemies of liberty simply for living as Christians? Far too many. But in the middle of their war, they cannot forget the teachings of our Lord. We as Christians do not believe in personal revenge. We believe in the justice of God and the law. That is why we pray every Sunday for our governments and militaries to protect civil rights everywhere. If they cannot do so, then the international community must protect those rights and guard the freedom of every human being, no matter their religion or ethnicity. Though this speech will end, as well this event, I pray that these words remain alive in your conscience. May you remember every day the lives of people who think like you and believe like you, but are not allowed to live like you. May you remember every day the lives of people who think like you, believe like you, but are not allowed to live like you. The glory of our nation comes from the glory of its foundation, the Constitution and its forefathers. This glory is not complete until it is practiced by supporting the persecuted. The souls of Coptic martyrs who stand at the throne of Christ will forever abide in the living martyrs as an example and divine fire of patriotism, love, hope, and faith. May God bless the souls of the Coptic martyrs. May God bless the living Copts. May God bless Egypt, the mother of the world, al-Dunya. May God bless the Christians and of the Levant and all those in it, of all religions who believe in peace and understand that man without liberty is a slave. May God bless all of you and the United States of America, guiding her as a voice for the voiceless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mother Dove. It's important to be reminded of the living martyrs, as you call them, people who continue to suffer every single day, and what a weight that is with the constant, systematic discrimination. Our last panelist is a good friend, Luann Sabatier, who works for the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. Luann spent 37 years working in media and communications. She's had senior management positions in publishing. She also managed her own company for 22 years that dealt with media and communications consulting practices. She actually has quite a few accolades, but we're going to keep it brief. At the moment, she's Director of Strategy and Communications, as I said, for the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. And for those of you not familiar with it, that is an organization that former Congressman Frank Wolf, who was one of the longtime champions of religious freedom and human rights, so that's the organization that he is affiliated with that he started. So with that, we'd love to hear from you, Luann.
I'll try to keep my remarks brief because I'm sure you have some questions of the panelists here. On behalf of the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative, our president, Randall Everett, who is based in Dallas, and let me say, first of all, take a little side trip. We did Speak Freedom Dallas last year, and I got to work with your president, Coptic Solidarity's president, George. And he was speaking at our event, and I spent the weekend with him, and it was an amazing experience, and I appreciated that collaboration. On behalf of our president, Randall Everett, who is in Dallas, our distinguished senior fellow, former Congressman Frank Wolf, our staff, of which one of them, would you raise your hand, stand up? We express our appreciation for the very, very important work that Coptic Solidarity does on behalf of Egyptian Copts. The event today, as you know, is held in recognition of the increasing number of Copts who have been killed for their faith, and to create a greater awareness of the plight of Copts who suffer religious persecution and daily discrimination. Today, as we focus on the massacre and the martyrs, let us acknowledge that one of the best gauges of a country's freedom is the security that the majority affords minorities. For Egypt to claim religious pluralism, it must extend protection equally. And we in the United States should not ignore abuses of these freedoms in countries that are considered allies. Although the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom's 2017 report moves Egypt off of the country of particular concern to a Tier 2 country, the restrictions on freedom of assembly, freedom of press, and freedom of speech in Egypt spawn daily occurrences of discrimination and persecution. This poses the greatest threat to their future. My background for 38 years has been in media, so I want to take a little side note and just make some of you aware here or on Facebook of something. How do you raise awareness about the martyrs and about the plight of Egyptian Copts? You do it through the media. Well, the media in Egypt is controlled by the state. The state media, as a matter of fact, blamed the Coptic protesters. In 2016, 303 press freedom violations were recorded. And the Committee to Protect Journalists places Egypt behind only Turkey and China in the number of journalists detained. And social media users face persecution. So I say to you, how do you raise awareness if you don't have the media? A core part of the organization I work with, the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative's mission, is to awaken the church in America to what is happening around the world to those being persecuted for their faith. Therefore, I ask you, and you on social media, how can the church, people of all faiths, advocate for religious freedom and the civil rights of Egyptians and the Copts in particular? What will move America to act? What can we, people of faith, do? I will offer 3 very practical recommendations. Number 1, the church. We must raise awareness of the issue. Events such as today are a tipping point to encourage churches, congregations, NGOs, legislators, and advocates in communities across America to use resources provided to you to inform the church, the media, and the general public. We can't help if we aren't aware. Number 2, engage. Do not sit back. Change begins at the local level, in your communities, in your churches, and your houses of worship. Adopt a community or a specific Coptic church in Egypt to pray for, or to follow, or to write to, or to financially support. Track what Congress is doing on this issue through the International Religious Freedom Congressional Scorecard. That is a wonderful tool founded many years ago by our friend Lindsay Vesey, and which she has handed off to me in our organization, irfscorecard.org. irfscorecard.org. Your legislators hold their feet to the fire. What are they doing for Egypt? What are they doing for the Coptic Christians? And last, support organizations like Coptic Solidarity. They are in the forefront lines of the issue in the United States. They are doing the crucial work. They are documenting the atrocities through their registry. They are dialoguing with legislators and NGOs. And most importantly, they are not just whipping it up, they are offering very concrete policy recommendations. And their website is copticsolidarity.org. In closing, 1 million Copts have immigrated and now live in the West, and we have over 500,000 living in sub-Saharan Africa. 8 million Copts remain in Egypt, living under a situation that continues to deteriorate. Despite persecution, there's nowhere for them to go. As was written in the Atlantic magazine recently, could the Egyptian Copts, the country's largest minority, and a community that has endured 2,000 years, at some point become extinct? As we are witnessing in Iraq, the answer tragically is yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that passionate speech, Lillian. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the support of your organization, who even behind the scenes has done so much for Coptic Solidarity. So thank you. We actually have one more panelist who I believe was not going to be able to make it, but has. We are very excited that Mr. Sammy Gerges from Freedom House is here today. So as a brief introduction, he is the Senior Program Officer for the Religious Freedom Program and Protecting Belief at Freedom House. He's a specialist in religious freedom, previously led the International Coptic Union in the UK. He earned his LLM in International Law from the University of Edinburgh and his MA in International Peace and Conflict Resolution from American University, and his BA in Economics and Political Science from Cairo University. But much more than your education, we want to hear from you as a Copt what you have to say to us today. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank Coptic Solidarity for all the work, and I have to confess that Coptic Solidarity is one of the few organizations that really document or care about Coptic case in a very neutral way. Let me start with the Pope statement to the congressman when he said that if our churches will be destroyed, we will pray in the mosque, and destroy the mosque, when they pray in the street. I have two questions maybe for the Pope at this point to ask, away from what does he mean by who, but my question is that who will allow you and your Christian to pray in the mosque and pray in the street? Coptic right now, when they are walking in the street, they cut their throats without praying, only walking. This is the solution. We saw that clearly in Alexandria, and this is very true, you can see it. We saw that recently in Cairo, in a mosque, popular place where most of Christians are living. So it should be even secure, but this is not the case. So, start from this point. We are today in a situation that really Coptic, it is a matter for level of this result. There's a systematic discrimination against them by the state in different fields. In practicing business, no one speaks about it. People don't know that most of Coptic businessmen, they have been discriminated against. They prevent from importing raw material for their factories. They have to sell their factories to the Middle factory. We speak, for example, as Hadid Bishai or Bishai factory, steel factory. They are selling it right now as it's going to the army. They are discriminated against in education. It is enough to be a Coptic Christian to get zero and the qualification exam for colleges and high school. And also that is the last year when the court and all the investigation felt to give this Coptic girl to get zero and the qualification exam only because she is Coptic. It is clear that the state is a part of the problem in Egypt. It is not a part of the solution. It is a part of the problem also to have the church trying to minimize our suffering over there. Despite all the suffering that Coptic minority are suffering from and all the problems, Coptic minority actually playing a very important role in that society. They are very well integrated. They are successful businessmen in Egypt. They are providing essential services to the majority of Muslims. More than that, they actually the front line for challenging the extremist thoughts and extremist ideas in Egypt. Copts were the only or the first group that talks about what they name right now citizenship rights. The word even was not in Arabic, but they invented this word when they started speaking about modern or citizenship. They were the first one. They were the first one to speak about human rights in general, not only about their rights. They are the only group who fought and advocated for Baha'i and Shia when they were discriminated against. Copts, they don't speak about themselves much, but they are the mean advocate for the others also. If we look right now about one of the leading organizations that document religious persecution, it is actually the unit is led by a Coptic Christian person. So at this point, we still have hope. But the feeling for Copts, they need power. They need to be power. If Egypt came without Copts, I can see that the national security for most of the countries will be affected. All the extremist thoughts they are challenging over there, it will come and affect all the international community. If the American army is fighting the extremists in Iraq, Copts are fighting the extremist ideas in Egypt. Egypt is a main ground for using extremist ideas and battles, and the main front to face this are Copts. Empowered Copts is very important. Leaving Copts alone is going to be reflected not only on the religious minority, but on all the international community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burgess. Well, we have time for a few questions and answers. Congressman Chris Smith should be on his way shortly. But we'd like to ask any of our panelists some questions in the meantime. If you'd like to come up here so we can see. So I'd like to open it up. And just speak loudly. There are no microphones in this room because it is so small. So any questions?
But who's the answer?
Any of the panelists?
Okay.
Based on our presentation.
Yes, sir. My question to Mr. Mansour. During all of your experience in Middle East and the Muslim country, we saw Sudan divided, Iraq divided, everything is divided to everybody get human rights. Do you think this is supposed to be happening in Egypt too? Or we will see all the Coptic get killed or travel? What is the solution? Solution is divided, the best one, or we will see a Coptic blood as a river again.
Okay, thank you for the question. It is really sad that Sudan has been divided into two countries, and I was not really supporting that. Merely because South Sudanese did not really wanted a secession. They wanted to be full citizens of Sudan. And as I said in my presentations, I think Islamists thrive on fragmenting the communities. This is why they said, or they decided to just let South Sudan go. I don't think for the Copts, we have presidents. For example, Jewish people used to live in the Middle East, in Iraq. Now maybe there are a handful of them. In Saudi Arabia, maybe there is zero. In Yemen, I don't think there is any. There are still maybe a handful in Egypt as well. So this is very sad that communities in the Middle East cannot protect their own citizens, as Father said here. For the Egyptian, I don't think there is a question about for them to have their own state, and I would really not encourage that. Egypt is a very not complex. It's a very diverse community. And
Same thing in Pakistan and India.
Yes.
So in your view, if you choose this way, so the blessed blood of Coptic. So you prefer blood better than divided?
No, I don't. I do not. I actually support any group of people who want to secede. I mean, if this is what they want, they can't really be forced to live in a place that they don't want to. I mean, this is just basic human rights for people to have self-determination. The future, I'm hopeful. I will remain always hopeful that situation are going to get better in the Middle East and for all the minorities to be protected. This is our job. This is part of my job to push for that because there is no alternative. As you said, that the only alternative would be for massacres to take place. And the only way we can deal with that is to really point to the right thing to point to the root causes of all this hate that is going on in these countries. And by doing that, we can actually direct those who have power to really stop them and build communities based on understanding, based on citizenship, based on, religion should not really play a role of who should be in this position or that position. We wanted countries which are based on full citizenship.
How do you put a killer as a church?
Let's take another question. How about Nathan?
Yes, thank you, Nathan White for the 21st Century World Workforce Initiative. Thank you all for your work on this very important issue for this important community in an important country and a very important part of the world. Lindsay, I know that you've worked on advocacy on this issue for a long time and worked previously with the previous ambassador at large for international religious freedom, David Saperstein, Rabbi David Saperstein. Yesterday was the confirmation hearing for Governor Sam Brownback to take on that position. What would you ask from Governor Brownback if he is to be confirmed as International Religious Freedom Ambassador for the sake of the Coptics in Egypt?
Thank you so much for that question. I watched the hearing yesterday. It was very brief. There weren't very many questions actually asked to Governor Brownback. So we didn't get a whole lot of sense of, his positions. All I can say is what I know previously from his work, that he has been very dedicated, particularly when he was in the Senate, to international religious freedom. So we look forward to, hopefully him being confirmed. In terms of what we would ask for, as I mentioned, some of you may have come a little bit later, we actually just published an article with a full list of our recommendations. It's in the folders in the back of the room. But just a couple of the items that are in there that we would ask of him, I'll highlight briefly. One is, there really is an absence of Copts in any high-level positions within society. So whether that's in intelligence, whether that's in academia, deans of universities, high in the media, any of those things. So not only do we want to ask that there would be people in those positions, but also affirmative action where Copts, the systematic discrimination that you're talking about, that could help start to change the culture and move things forward. That's one thing that I don't think anybody has really pushed for. There's so many issues, it's hard to pick, but there's other things such as the kidnapping of Coptic women and girls. Very recently, a former person involved with it talked about how it's very much coordinated through the government, through mosques, and that he would be paid for every girl that they kidnapped. And these girls are forcibly converted and married. So, drawing attention to those types of things. Of course, there's many other issues. So I'll just mention one more because the list is so long. That would be the church law that was passed. So the recent church law has been touted as this big improvement, but it was a Congressman Sherman, somebody mentioned that now you don't have to get the president's approval, now it's the governor. We see that it maintains many of the loopholes that were previously existed. And then we see from Bishop Macarios in Minya, who's saying, look at the huge number of churches that haven't been reopened. Weren't the churches supposed to be reopened with the new law? How many new churches have been approved? Those are the questions that we're asking. And we're not really seeing that improvement. We're actually looking forward in the State Department report. I see someone here from the State Department. We're hoping that in the next chapter report on Egypt, that there'll have been enough time where they'll be able to say, how many permits were requested, how many have been accepted, are churches being opened or not. So those are probably some of the biggest things. And then lastly, I would conclude with just basic protection. Isn't that the government's number one responsibility, to protect its own people? And when we see the kind of things that we're seeing, the quantity of people, not all the people are being killed in a church bombing or in a huge terrorist attack, but there are many people who've been killed right on the streets or in their homes. And those are the types of situations where we think the Egyptian government should take more seriously protecting its Coptic citizens. So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Saudi Arabia, your own country, joined recently Egypt, Bahrain, and the Emirates to condemn Qatar for supporting terrorists. This is ironic because who is solidarity? Who is supporting the Salafis, the Wahhabi? Who have the most hate words which trigger all the terrorist attacks, especially in the village of Egypt? Is usually the terrorist attack in this village started by a Salafi sheikh who spread the hate speech against God, then trigger all the violence. This country, which tells that Qatar is the supporter, Saudi Arabia is the main supporter of the terrorists. How to talk to them, how to let them see the wood in their eyes before they can say the ash in the Qatar.
Okay, for them, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, I agree with you actually that Saudi Arabia is one of the major sponsor of terrorism and the spreading of radicalism around the world. So I 100% agree with you. And I think most people in this room understand that the attack or the siege that is being placed on Qatar has nothing to do with Qatar being the sponsor of terrorism. I think both do sponsor radical groups in Syria, both Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And I think the whole situation against Qatar is actually for money. It's basically they're blackmailing Qatar for its resources, especially the gas resources. So when I say we need to direct the fingers on the real sponsor, the real people, the real countries and organizations that support radicalism, I'm talking about the free world, like Europe, the United States, the United Nations, not Saudi Arabia. I don't think it's in their best interest to stop terrorism. For them, spreading hate is what they do to survive. For them to separate people, to do whatever they can to just make their communities fragmented is what keeps them alive. When people come together to understand that they're the one who are responsible for their misery, for the terror, for the crime, for them not to have a say in their own government, then that will mark their demise and the end of their reign. So I think the U.S. government has a really big responsibility in this. Our alliance with Saudi Arabia and Qatar is, I think, is going to go in the history as one of the worst decisions that we have made. Because on the one hand, we promote democracy and human rights, and on the other hand, we shake the hands of the people who promote the complete opposite values.
It looks like Congressman Chris Smith, who has been tied up, is not going to be able to join us, but we're going to take one more question here from the back before we wrap up.
Yeah, just comment. We are in Coptic Solidarity. We work for equal rights for all Egyptians. We work for religious freedom for all Egyptians. We work for human rights for all Egyptians. We work for justice for all Egyptians. We, like what happened with King Solomon, we can split our son. The whole Egypt for all Egyptians. The whole Egypt for Copts, because we are indigenous minority. We are indigenous people. So Egypt for all Egyptians. We work just for justice, for equal rights, for everything. We are persecuted, Quran persecuted minority. I agree that the state behind deep discrimination. So we work for human rights, equal rights for all Egyptians. Thank you.
So Just in closing today, I want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and to commemorate martyrs with us. I hope that it sends a message to Copts, especially those in Egypt, but those worldwide, that they know that there are people here in the U.S. Congress, there are people here in Capitol Hill who care about them, who want to support them. And then lastly, for people, if you're not that familiar with our organization, please visit our website. It's www.copticsolidarity.org. We love to hear people's ideas, suggestions. We want you to be involved with our advocacy work, with volunteering or donating, whatever you can do. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming.